This morning about business, and we're talking about PPPs, or as they're known, public-private partnerships. Now, what do you know about PPPs? Currently, with the economic climate, this acronym or the three letters seem to be cropping up a lot more. So to delve deeper into the discussion and enlightening us a lot more, we have the likes of Dr. Roger Cranting, who is with the Commonwealth Secretariat, and also Dr. Charles Urefu-Brobe. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
How are you?
Good. We are alive.
Good. First off, for the lay person who's not aware actually what a PPP is, or a private partnership, public-private partnership, could you enlighten us a little bit on the actual definition or what it actually is? Any of you?
Okay, senior man should go first.
It's just the latest jargon on what really happens. If you talk about public-private partnership, what you're talking about is the age-old political, ideological debate of what should government do and what should government leave to the private sector to do. And that has been happening all the time. In the Cold War era days, then there was a real debate as to whether government should be doing absolutely everything. That's what's happening in the old Soviet era. Even in places like Britain, the Labour Party for years had entrenched in its constitution what they call Clause 4, that government should essentially be in charge of production, the old Stalinist stuff. Here, the example I can think of is General Champon's government must take charge of the commanding heights of business, those kind of things. But all those things have left us long ago. And now, the whole debate is about what government should do and what government should not do. But it's happening in practice. I don't think it's a new concept, and I don't think we should, put any mystery on it. For example, government is in charge of providing social facilities such as education.
Yeah.
In the old days, the government would have gone out and had institutions like the State Construction Company go out and actually physically build schools.
Yes.
Now it contracts the private sector
To do so.
To do so. If you take something like the sector, because since this is looking at infrastructure, at the energy sector, long ago, almost 20 years ago, we said, look, it's not government's business to go and invest in power infrastructure. Government is to provide us with power, but it contracts the private sector to come in and make its investment and do that. But all across, public-private partnership defines the governance structure. So I don't want us to have any mystery about some new concept. It isn't. I mean, as we go on to the discussion, I'll give you several examples of what constitutes a public-private partnership. So first of all, let me say that it is nothing new.
It's not a new
Think about, it's like one of those wonderful phrases we've had for 30 years, the private sector is the engine of growth. What does it mean? It means nothing. But I just want to start off by saying it's one of those international development jargons that come up and we pick it up, and it doesn't mean anything. You don't need a policy. It's been happening and will continue to happen. It happens every day in our daily lives.
All right. Well, obviously the definition has already been given.
That's right.
Advantages.
Well, I mean, taking from what Dr. Robes have said, the idea is that there are certain functions, public functions or public service delivery that the private sector could do better than government. And there are certain functions government could do better. So there is this idea that there's a whole lot of things the government sector could learn from the private sector.
Right.
And of course, I also believe that there are certain things the private sector could learn from government sector. For example, customer service, efficiency. Private sector leads on that.
That's right.
And you and I know that when it comes to customer service, it's very, very bad and poor in government.
Non-existent, if you ask me.
Non-existent, of course. But what can we also learn? What can the private sector learn from government? It becomes a very difficult one, but it is not. Social responsibility. You see, the private sector cannot go and do business in the forest. You do business in cities,
yes,
in countries, in towns, in communities. Who is responsible for those communities that you can go buy and sell? Somebody manage those communities. So you have to give something back to the community that you have made your profit on. At times, even abnormal or supernormal profits. So it's give and take. And that's why the framers of PPP, which of course is not an old, is not a new concept. What has happened is that you can graduate it from a very low level PPP to a higher level PPP in terms of the quantum and the spread and the span of the project.
Okay.
So the advantage is that private sector have something that the government can learn. One of the key advantage will be financing. See, the private sector have a private capital.
Yes.
So government need not to finance all the projects to deliver service to the public. You can team up with the private sector, and private sector will deliver the financial bit of it, and then deliver the service that the government should deliver. You see, the point, at times people become emotional about private sector involvement, but the point is that government business is to deliver efficient and effective service. As to how that service is delivered should not be a concern to anybody.
Right.
If I want a good education for my kids and for myself, that is what the society will need. As to who is providing that shouldn't be emotional issue.
Right.
So there's a lot of advantages when the government and the private sector comes together in terms of delivering the service to the citizen, because every government, your basic responsibility to the citizenry,
yes,
is to ensure effective service delivery like education, health, good water, good roads, and stuff like that. So if you can get the private sector to help you to deliver, then that is a good concept.
Dr. Verpruve, I'm going to ask you this because obviously with what you mentioned about it being jargon and obviously not anything new, has the current reoccurrence or the current emergence of these continuous mentions of PPP, is it a reflection of what's currently happening within our economy?
It is partly, yes, it is partly that. I mean, we're dealing essentially with procurement.
Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with. And you deal with procurement in the context of what does government procure directly and what does it procure through the private sector. So that is really the point. What we have now is that it's become increasingly clear. If you look at our national budget, we've now recognized that, first of all, more than 70% of the taxes and the revenue we make is going to pay the wages and salaries.
Yeah.
If you look at our budget, less than 10 to 15% of the total budget is being given to capital development.
Right, yeah.
Now, if you need to provide electricity, for example, to a growing population, and don't forget we've moved from 15% access to now nearly 80% access.
Yeah.
We simply do not have the money within our own coffers
to do so, yeah.
to go and get electricity infrastructure. And it is the reason why we're talking about that. There's been a transition. When people talk about, we pat ourselves on the back about moving from a poor to, let's say, middle income
Nation.
economy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of implications for that. We used to be able to get World Bank money at 1% interest, 40 years to pay. All those things are not there. And in fact, when we were in the category of what was called the least developed countries of the most seriously affected, then everything that you got was essentially given away as free money by the donors.
Yeah.
Now we've grown up, we've become big girls and big boys, and we have to fend for ourselves.
True.
But the point I'm trying to make is that, over the last 20 or 30 years, this has infected and has been part of our system. For example, we've been inviting people to come into the power sector under, what they call PPAs. where you essentially go and say to a private sector person or a company, come and build a power plant, and then you get your money through the tariffs. It's been happening. The reason we haven't succeeded there is that, we don't recognize that the private sector, like everybody else, is in business to make profits.
Yeah.
And so if you invite somebody from the private sector to go and offer you an infrastructure service, and then you turn around and say that we are so concerned about the people that the right tariffs must not apply, what you're saying to the investor is that
We don't care.
we don't care, and please, you are going to risk your money, so they will not come. So there are several responsibilities all around when you are talking about PPPs.
Yeah.
And so we need to really, if we're talking infrastructure, yes, they are very, very expensive things to invest in. But look at telephony provision, for example. It's totally private sector driven.
Yes, it is.
The old days of Ghana Telecom is gone. But nobody is setting prices for how much you pay for mobile calls. We're paying 10 pesos per minute.
Yeah.
Very expensive. But everybody is doing it. And there's competition. And it is totally, entirely private sector driven. But that's infrastructure. So when we start talking about all these concepts, we should be very, very careful in making sure that there are responsibilities on the side of government and on the side of the private sector. But at the heart of it all, if the private sector cannot get its money back and get a return on its investment, you don't have anything.
Do so. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Kranting, with a situation like Ghana has at the moment, what would make it, obviously everybody wants to come into for profit. Are we in an environment where it is attractive to private investors to come and actually invest this kind of capital to help with the development and infrastructure?
Yeah, essentially we have some of the preconditions available, but not all of them. See, when we're talking about PPP, first there are two things you have to take into consideration. Can you carry the larger public with you? Because essentially, if we look at some experiences we have had in the past, like in the water sector and all that, the public were not with government. They didn't appreciate the whole issue and ethos of the PPP. Two, do we have the public sector that can design an effective partnerships with the private sector, so that we are not just giving away, or we are the country not getting ripped off? You see, what I've realized in this country is that we talking about PPP, but it's a very complex subject. It's a whole lot of things. You are talking about PPP, you start from the very basic is service contract. Talk about management contract. You're talking about lease, you're talking about concession, you're talking about joint lease and joint concession, to all the way to diversity and all that. So when you design a PPP project with a private partnership, I quite remember one of them was management contract. You see, management contract, even in water sector, what the public were not educated was that in management contract in form of PPP, there's no expansion responsibility on the private sector partner. All that you are saying is that come and manage the operations of the existing asset
as it is.
As it is. If you want expansion, then you move on to another ladder, another notch, like concession. The concession, you give the asset to the highest bidder, and then within the concession, he will go to expand, add on to the asset. And they have to ask, Dr. Rekubrewe said, he has to recoup his investment, and it's a very huge investment, so then you give him 25 years or 30 years to operate and transfer after 35 or 30 years or 25 years. But when you go and sign service contract, which means that come and just, like if you take, say, utility, and I sign a service contract and a PPP agreement, all that you are saying that small aspect of the operations like metering or collecting tariff, you can assign that to somebody, a private sector, to do it. In that case, you don't expect that, we should expand water and the private sector have come into the milieu and is not doing anything. We don't get water in our... So it's a whole lot of public education I have gone through so that you could understand. But the bottom line is that I think it's about policy. If government put the right kind of policy in place, the political stability we have, which is a very good ingredient, and then you liberate the pricing within certain parameters, then you're going to get a lot of private sector coming on board, because a lot of countries have developed, particularly if you go to, say, India, Singapore, you're going to get private sector building a whole airport, and they will manage it for about 25 years and revert it back. But my point is that you can get, look, in Botswana, I was there a few months ago, they have built a whole university, a private sector, to manage it and own it for about 25 years, it will revert to that. So you can build road and make it a toll for a number of... So we could do all this, but the point is that we need to understand what we are going, bring the public on board, and educate the public that it's the service that we want. As to who owns it, shouldn't be too much of a problem. So long as you are getting your good roads, you are getting good education, good hospitals, good airports, and so that should be...
That's a good...
This is the issue of public policy. I mean, maybe you want to have a break, but the point is that...
No, go on.
Bringing the public on board. You see, we need to stop certain types of thinking. Almost 60 years after becoming independent, there is a perception that government must deliver and deliver things for free. That is where we need, and unfortunately, governments of all hue and cry provide this justification for people who continue to believe that governments must deliver. So you hear people say, government has done well for doing this, government has done well for doing that. And that transition requires a change of attitude from the government. You see, most of our politics, you want to be a politician here, you sit there and your potential constituents bring their school fees, they bring their this, they bring
I was going to get into
all of that.
Yeah.
Now, so at the essence of this whole thing and the democratic structure is an expectation that government and the representatives of the people must deliver to us for free.
Yeah,
we need to get away from that. Let me give you examples of where I'm saying there was nothing new. We have governments used to provide training through government secretarial schools, etc., for young people, etc. Then we came up with the concept of JIDA. The issue is not whether you should have JIDA or not have JIDA, but the issue is that you have contracted the private sector because you think it's more efficient at delivering certain things. What you get problematic, that's why I was talking about procurement, is the process by which you procure. Does that improve the efficiency by transparency?
Yes.
So we really must, and I could go on, if you go to the advanced economies, Boeing brings jets here every day, Airbus brings jets here every day. Do you know how they survive? They survive because their government contract defense services, etc., from them, so that they can then be able to get that comfort zone to be able to provide the private services. I will come to that because it is at the heart of the issue of PPP. How you contract and how you ensure that there's even greater efficiency.
Okay, now like we're saying with PPP, the whole concept is inviting private sector to come in, invest, help us develop, and then hand over to us. How is that possible?
There's another side to it before we go on. There's the direct procurement. For example, take school feeding program. I'm just saying the whole thing is happening all over. When I was in Queen Elizabeth Day Nursery, they called it at the time, the Day Nursery was run totally by the municipal authority, including contracting people to cook on the payroll of the municipal authority. Under the school feeding, you're essentially contracting private sector people to provide that service. That's an example of PPP. Because one of the other things about PPP is that government in most economies, and I hear probably 80% of procurement will probably be done by government. So the issue then becomes, how do you structure in such a way that you provide efficient competition for the private sector to provide things which government pays for? So those are the elements.
Okay, but let me ask you both this now, because we've spoken about the PPP, the why it's being done, but how is it that we can actually expect people to, or even the public as well as the investors, buy into this whole thing when every time we have government, which we all know is two particular parties because everything seems to be so partisan within the country, as soon as the government comes into power, they start scrapping the plans of previous government because they've come in and they decided to do things in a completely different way. How is that attractive to a private investor when they're coming in with such a huge capital investment and all of a sudden, because it's not black, it's white?
On the issue of PPP, let me tell you something. There's more commonality amongst the political parties than differences. The instinct of the politicians is to seek to control. It doesn't matter whether it's MPP or NDC. And they give the wrong signals for political purposes. I try to hint you. If we want, you're talking about water, for example. People are complaining about not having water or not having electricity. The reality is that if you take Accra, the population of Accra has probably grown tenfold or more. Okay? Government will not have the money to invest in the expansion. It may go to a private sector person. But in so long as government is trying to be all things to all people, in saying that I'm going to provide the thing for you, and you are not going to have to pay the right price for it, you have a problem. And that's nothing to do with MPP and DC. All the governments are the same. My favorite proverb is an Albanian proverb that says, the only free cheese is in a mousetrap. So we need to start getting people to understand. When you go to the market and you buy your konlo of rice or whatever, you are paying the price. We have a very bad public transport system in this country because it's totally driven by the trotros, and they will set the price. So there is a philosophical discussion about how African governments and Ghanaian governments start to tell the truth to the people that there's no free lunch. So that's what I'm saying. I just want to say that it is nothing about scrapping. It is all about every government being honest with the people of Ghana and saying that we can ensure that things happen, but we cannot, you need to pay the right price
in order to get what
in order to get the best. I mean, we have an educational system right now. We spend 30% of our national budget on it. But I can tell you that as we sit here, even my driver takes their children to private school because the quality of the public education is so bad that they know that it is not going to do anything. So I all I'm saying about the whole thing, this discussion of public-private partnership has to go to the heart of the governance structure, our political ideology. Kwame Nkrumah was fantastic, but a lot of us still think in the old days of the state must provide. I read recently that government wants to revive Pualugu tomato factory. Well, Kufuor revived it and it died. So JDM reviving it is also die. Because at the heart of the problem, we haven't realized that
grassroots. Okay. Dr. Kante, how does currency come into play? Because obviously the cedi not being as powerful as it was. Obviously there was a point where we were one to one with the pound, I think. But right now we really don't have a strong currency. How does that come to play in regards to actively seeking out effective public-private partnership?
Well, I think it's quite disturbing. I mean, when you have a fluctuating exchange rate, first it affects planning, it affects businesses, because you see, you can when you are planning, you do your budgeting and you are costing, and you use certain exchange rate, and by the time you finish, that rate has deteriorated so much, it's affect your margin, It affects your selling price and everything. It's bad for business when your exchange rate is not stable. It's bad for the economy. It shrinks the economy. So I think the managers of our economy should be up and doing. They have to arrest that situation before things degenerate into, because what you're going to have, if you continue like this, you're going to get the city is so devalued that workers are going to go for demonstration for higher salary because the value has halved. They can no longer meet their, in Ghana parlance, they say the ends are not meeting. So that is it. But of course, when it comes to private partnership, public-private partnership, you see, you are bringing foreign exchange, foreign capital.
Yeah.
Because particularly if you're looking at the big projects, then obviously you are bringing private capital, private capital inflows from outside. In that sense, it may not affect it so much because it's the inflow. What is going to affect is that if you want to generate foreign exchange, then you need a whole backload of your local currency to get, the foreign exchange.
No, it is the value of your currency reflects the strength of your economy. So that is, you need to manage your economy well to make sure that. But in terms of the promotion of private sector, it has two impacts. First of all, as he says, at the local private sector level, because virtually all the inputs, even for local production, are imported, it does tend to disturb your planning. Adjustment formula that every month, 3 months triggers your electricity price, and the local person who is buying the service is being squeezed from two ends.
Doesn't realize.
They don't get the salary increase. Their salaries are not adjusted automatically according to foreign exchange. So it gets to a point where even with your good intent of saying that we must charge the right price, the consumer consumer gets to a point where they simply can't afford. So the foreign exchange factor, that's where it really comes in. That it moves you away from your theoretical perspective to the reality where the trade union says our salaries haven't gone up commensurate with
strikes.
Exactly. So those are but the important thing is to make sure that you run your economy well. We can't afford. I lived in Britain at the time of Thatcher, which you probably did. Right. He says, let's run the economy like we run our household income. We can't run economies where we are constantly spending and also budgeting to overspend and not spending properly. That is the instability.
Okay. Just to wrap things up, because we've actually run out of time. Name one industry right now that you would like to see a nice big injection or a nice PPP plan which can go forward and flourish within Ghana.
Like I said, it's happening already. But let's deal with the reality that if we want to provide our people with the basic services of utilities, then we must invite more people to come into the electricity sector, must invite more people to come into the water sector, and all the things that we consider. A lot of it has become privatized anyway, education, etc. But in terms of basic infrastructure, water is life. Power is life. So let's make sure that we give the incentives to those who have the real money. Because unfortunately, when you talk about that kind of stuff, the Ghanaian investor doesn't have the money, and the Ghanaian stock exchange is not raising the money. So it has to come from abroad.
I will go from the district assembly level to the national level. You see, in the district assembly level, if you look at all the metropolitan areas, there are a lot of opportunities for private parties, public-private partnerships. You have in African countries where private sector have built, even say, markets. They build lorry stations, a modern one, when they are allowed to run, to provide those efficient services. So all the disassembly should map out which areas they think they can go into private partnership ventures. At the national level, if we got the policy right, we should be able to build a brand new airport. Seriously, you have people are ready because you see they can make their money because people are traveling all the time. It shouldn't be a headache of government. Our railway system, our infrastructure, there are a lot of opportunities that we could do if we get the policy right.
All right. Thank you ever so much for joining me this morning, and I'm hoping that we can call you in again to further discuss this at another point in time. This has been Dr. Roger Cranting with the Commonwealth Secretariat and Dr. Charles Rekugoro. Thank you so much for coming.